Hello and welcome back. My name is Avilash and you're watching Selenium Express, and in this video we're going to be having a deep dive to a question which is very popular in Spring Boot interviews. The question is why constructor injection is preferred over the setter injection or field injection when it comes to Spring or when it comes to Java, and why it is recommended to use the constructor based injections. Well, before we go into that, in this video, first of all, I'll tell you what is a dependency injection, and about the dependency injection pattern we're going to be following with some simple examples so that everyone who is watching the video will be in the same page. And if you are already aware about the dependency injection stuff, just switch to the question with this timestamp. So once we learn the dependency injection, we're going to be understanding why setter injection is not that much recommended by the people, and why constructor injection is recommended by everyone and even by Spring framework to do the dependency injection. Forget about interviews. As a developer, we should feel comfortable using the constructor based injection because it has so much of benefit when it comes to the immutability, when it comes to the unit testing, when it comes to the avoiding circular dependency. There's so much of reason why should we use constructor injection, and I hope this video will help you to find out different reasons. So let's just get started. So let's just start digging in what dependency injection is by creating a simple Spring Boot project first. Let's have a deep dive. Alright, so let's just start creating a Spring Boot project from scratch. So let's just go to start.spring.io and let's just choose all the defaults. Only I want to select the project build as a Maven, and the language I'll keep it as Java, and I will go with the 3.1.4 version, and the project metadata I have filled in the details. I'll go with Java 17. I do not want to choose any dependencies over here, and I'll click on generate. Okay, that's going to create a project for me, and I will just import it to my IntelliJ. So dependency injection demo is my project. I'm going to drag it to my IntelliJ and let it open over here. All right, so I got my project here called dependency injection demo, and let's just get started. Okay, so before we get started with the actual question that we're trying to understand over here, before that, let's first understand what is exactly a dependency injection means. All right, who am I? I'm a human, right? So am I dependent on anything? I think I have to breathe to survive, isn't it? So maybe I'll be needing air to breathe. Maybe I will be needing water to drink to survive, and maybe I will be needing food to eat to survive as well. So air, water, and food, these are the three things as a human that I am depend on, right? So let's just do the same thing over here. Let's just go to the source main Java, and let's just create a class here called human. So I'll go to the Java class over here, and I'll create a new class called human. So in my human class, I will be having some dependency. And what are the dependency I'll be having? So I'll be needing air. So I'll be writing here air. Okay. So air is a class that I'll be creating. And also I'll be needing water because I need to drink water to survive. So I'm going to say water. That's it. So these are the two dependencies that I have as a human. That's why I have declared it as a variable inside the human class. Okay, without wasting any time, let me just create this couple of classes. So I'll hover on this and create a class called air, and I'll do OK. I'll go to the previous tab and I'll hover on this one, and I'll create a class called water. Okay, and I'll click on OK. Okay, so if I have air and water, I can leave, right? So let me create a method here called leave. Okay, and in the leave method, maybe I will say public, and let me have a simple void method. I'm going to be writing a sysout, and I'm going to say alive. I am living my life. Okay, cool. But I can only leave when I have my dependencies present, which is air and water. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna write here a if clause, and I'm gonna say if air equals null, or the water equals null, that I cannot leave. So I have to mention it over here, and I'm gonna say s out, and I'm gonna say dead. I cannot leave. All right, and I'll put this system.out.println in the else clause, right, to make it very simple. There you go. So we have this leave method, okay, and the leave method is basically does what? It sprints like, you know, if I'm alive, and I can only be alive if this condition is false, right? If the air and water is null, then I'll be dead. If the air and water is present, then I'm alive. Cool. Okay, so now using this human class, let's just try to bring in the dependency injection, because obviously right now air and water is null and they are not assigned over here, or they are not initialized. So in order to initialize this air and water, I have to inject. I have to create objects of air, and I have to create objects of water, and I have to inject it to this variable. So how can we do that? There are many different approaches. The first approach I'm going to be using over here, that's going to be a constructor approach. So I'm going to hit Command and N over here, and I'm going to create a constructor using this two variable. And using this constructor, whenever I'm creating the human class object, I will be telling whoever is using this particular constructor that the air and water are a couple of dependency of this human class. So you have to get these couple of objects. So once they are going to provide these objects, I'm going to be set that object to this air and water that I have defined over here. Okay, let's just see, like, you know, how a client can do the dependency injection using this constructor. So let's just go to the project, and I'll be creating a new class here called test. Let's just go to the Java class, and I'm going to create a class called test. And inside this test class, let's say I have the main method, okay, like this. And inside this main method, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create the human object. So I'm going to say human is equal to new human. Obviously, whenever I'm creating the object, now we can see there is a red line over here, because now Java is forcing me to initialize the air and water in order to create the object of human, because there is no single param constructor over here. And in order to create this object, we have to provide this couple of dependency. And now the client, whoever is creating the human class object, this test class is the client. The client is well aware, like this human object cannot be created, and in order to create that, you have to provide the new air object and also the new water object over here. So this couple of objects right now can go as a dependency, and we're going to be injecting it with the human class. Through this constructor, we're going to be taking the air object here, water object here. So the air and water will go to this air and water that I have defined over here. Now these variables will get values, which is pretty simple. So this is how we call a constructor injection. Using this constructor, we are injecting the human class dependency, which is air and water in this case. And now I can simply go ahead and can use the leave method right here, and obviously it is going to work fine. I'm going to do a right click, run the main method over here, and let's just see like what happens in the console. So there you go, alive, I'm living my life. Okay, so this way of injecting the dependencies are called constructor based dependency injection. But why this is preferred? In order to make you realize that, I will go with the other way. Maybe I'm gonna comment these things out right here, and let's say right now if I'm gonna comment this human class constructor, then obviously if I'll go to the test class right here, I'm having problems here because I do not have this constructor available. If I'm gonna run this leave method right now, obviously this is not going to work, and as the dependencies are not present, it is just saying me dead. I cannot leave, because obviously right now if I'll go to this leave method, the air and water both are null, so this if condition executes, and obviously right now they do not have any value. Now let's just follow another approach. As I have commented out the constructor, I'll go over here and create a setter method. I'm going to do a command N, and I'm going to create setter for both this air and water, and like this, set air, which takes the air variable and set it to the air variable that we have defined over here. And like that, we have another method called set water right here. So we have a couple of setters here, right? Now using this setters, we can also inject the object of air and can set it to the air that we have defined over here, so that they will no longer be null. So how can we do that? I'll go to the test class, and right here, after I create the human class object, so let me just use that. So human dot set air, and I'm going to be defining the new air over here. Okay. And also I'll be adding another dependency that I need. So I'm going to say human dot set water, and I'm going to be giving the water dependency like this. All right. Now let's just execute this leave method right here. Let me just run this. And there you go. Alive, I'm living my life. So obviously this method I'm able to call, and this is just saying me alive, because both the dependencies over here I'm setting, and I'm just setting it using the set air and the set water method. Let's say the set air method is taking the air class object and is just accepting it and setting that one with this air variable, and just like the set water is setting the water object right over here. So here I'm doing the dependency injection using this setter method over here, and this is what we call the setter injection, the dependency injection using setter. But right now, before I tell you why this setter injection is bad, let's just think in this way. Here we are trying to create the human class object by ourselves. We're setting the human class dependency right over here, then executing any methods that I have over here. But one thing, before we go to the Spring part, one thing you notice over here, there is an absolute probability whenever I'm using this setter method, there is an absolute probability that I will be forgetting to add one of the dependency. In the constructor time, it was forcing me to provide the dependency of human class whenever I'm initializing the human object. Right now, it is not forcing me. See, even if I'm commenting this couple of lines, still there is no problem, right? Still, if I'm going to run this, the program will not complain during the compile time. But whenever I'm running, I'm getting unexpected output, which is dead. I cannot leave. So there is an absolute probability whenever you are creating the human class object, you may forget to set one of the dependency like this. Now in this case also, let's say if I'm forgetting to add one of the dependency over here, still it is just saying dead, I cannot leave. So I have to make sure as a developer, I'm adding all my dependency right over here, isn't it? If I'm going to run this, see, right now it's just saying alive, I'm living my life. That's the number one thing. The setter injection does not complain anything in the compile time, right? It will let our program run, but the problem comes when the program runs and it just says at that time that there is something going wrong. And there is another problem in the setter injection I'm going to tell you right now. Let's say this human is also dependent on food. Right now, I realize that I am also dependent on food. So I'm going to go over here and add a food dependency. So I'm going to say food over here. And let me create a new class of food. Let's say create a class food, and I'm going to create a new class here called food. I'll go to the human class. In order to do the dependency injection, I'll be creating a setter injection approach. So I'm going to do command N, and I'm going to create a new setter method for food as well, like this. Let me just bring it down. Set air, set water. I'm going to say set food over here. So now let's say I have this set food over here, and I have one more dependency I'll be mentioning right over here. Food equal to null. Just something like this. Right now, see, I have added this dependency, the new dependency called food, inside my human class right here. But see how does it creates the problem. Right now, if I'll go to my client class, see, here I have not added that dependency. If I'm going to run this, if I'm going to run this, it's going to say did, I cannot leave. So when somebody changes the class, human class, and adds a new dependency, if it is not the constructor injection, if it is the setter injection, then in the compile time, the client, like the test class, will never realize that there is something has been changed and there is a mandatory dependency added in the human class, and that has to be initialized as well. So this food has to be initialized, and this is a mandatory dependency. And now we are using the setter approach, which is not the best approach to do the dependency injection. Well, it works whenever we basically add this human dot set food, and I'm going to add a new food object. Now it will work. But the thing is that it is not forcing me to initialize the food object whenever I'm initializing the human class. Imagine like creating a constructor over here like this, taking one more argument of food, isn't it? That would have a good approach. Well, we'll go into that. But before that, so let's just go to the Spring part, and let's just, bring in Spring, because Spring is famous for dependency injection. And let's just see how Spring help here, in order to maintain the dependency injection for us. And then we'll go to the do's and don't part. Okay, right now let's just go to the test.java. Here everything we are doing manually, isn't it? The set air, the set water, the set food. We are only creating the food object, water object, air object. We are only setting it right over here, set air, set water, set food. We are only creating the human object. All these things, all these unnecessary things, we as a developer are doing it, and Spring doesn't like that. Spring says, well, boss, I'm here, I will do the line number 7 to line number 11. That is my responsibility. You just tell me to do it. I'm gonna maintain this much things for you till line 7 to line 11. I'm here to create objects for you and also do the dependency injections for you. So I will right now hand over this much of responsibility to Spring. Okay, before that, let me just simplify this a little bit for you. Here I'm creating a new air object. I'm going to do Command Option B, and I'll do the same for a new water as well. So I'm going to do Command Option B. I'll create a new water object, and also this food object. I'm going to create a new declaration line for this, Command Option B. Okay, so there you go. So now these are all the objects that has been created for me. And then I'm using all these objects, air, water, food. These three objects I'm creating because the human class does need this. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing the dependency injection over here. Set air, set water, set food. I'm providing the air, water, and food object that I have created over here in the dependency. And then I'm calling the leave method. So here, actually, I am doing the dependency injection. And this is my object creation. Let's say object creation, right? So let's just give this much of responsibility to Spring. Okay, so how can I tell Spring to create the human object for me? It's very simple. I can go to the human class, and here I can mention the add component annotation, and that's it. Right now Spring is going to create the human object for me. So how can I tell Spring to create the air, water, food object for me as well? Because I don't want to do these things explicitly right now. So I'll go to the food class. I'll put the same annotation over here called @component. I'll go to the water class, and I'll also annotate this one as @component. And also I'll go to the air class and also use the @component annotation over here. Now, as I have the @component annotation over air, water, and food class, then I do not have to write this many lines of code. Even human class is annotated with @component. These many lines I don't have to write it by myself. So I can easily remove this much of things. The object creation part, I have given responsibility to Spring. But here I'm doing the dependency injection. The object that we have created, we have to attach it with the human object using the setter injection. So whenever the human class object will be created right here by Spring, because I have marked it with @component, the Spring is also going to inject the dependency for air, water, and food. But how it is going to inject is previously we have taken the setter injection approach. So the way we can instruct Spring that whenever you are creating this human class object, we have 3 dependency that you also have to inject. So as Spring has created these objects as well, the food object, water object, air object, because we have @component annotation marked, I will go to the human class. So you already have these objects. Just make sure whenever you are creating the human class object, use the setter method of human class in order to inject this object. And the way I can tell it to Spring, I'll go to all of my setter class and I'll mark it as @AutoWord, right? I'm going to say @AutoWord, and I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it like this. And also I'll go to the food, I'll paste it like this. Okay, so now using this @AutoWord, now Spring is going to create the object for me, and also Spring is going to do all the setter injection things. So I can also leave these things as well. So all those things that we have written, the creating the object part and injecting the object using the setter method, right now all will be done by Spring because of the annotations that we have added over here, and because of the annotations that we have added over here. I hope that makes sense, but I'm going to revert my code back and simply I'm going to comment out all this code because this is no longer required. Okay, and I'm gonna right now take this leave method and I'm gonna be calling it right now using Spring Framework. So I can copy this. Now I do not need the test class right now. I'll straight away go to the Spring Boot class, the class that Spring Boot has created for me. I'll go over here right now, and right here now this is the method that I have to call. So right now, in order to call this leave method, I have to have a human class object. Now, how can I ask for the human class object to Spring? In order to do that, Spring has a container, as you guys know, and inside the Spring container, it has all those objects that we asked Spring to create. Like the human class object, we asked Spring to create because we have mentioned a component annotation. The food class object, we asked Spring to create because we have the @component annotation. So Spring has a container, and that container has created all those objects for me. So where is that container? That container is this one. This run method internally is going to create a container for me. So to make sure it is happening, I can just do a command Option B, and this is going to get me a container object, right? So I'm just handling the return type over here. Okay, so here is the container object. So right now this container will contain all my objects. Let's just see whether we have all the objects over here or not. So I'm going to just do container object dot get bean definition name. Let's just see like if what are the bean definition this container contains, whether it contains my food object, whether it contains my human object, whether it contains my air object, so that I can ask for those objects and I can do some work on top of those objects. So I'm gonna use this, and obviously the container will have a lot of objects. So if you're gonna hover on this bean definition names, I believe this is going to get me a string array, and I can iterate over it, and I'm gonna just write a system.out.println to print all the beans that I have inside it. So system.out ::println. Okay, I think this is going to give me an array. Let me just convert it to a string list so that I can iterate over it easily. So I'm going to say arrays dot is list. Okay, and I'm going to define this number of elements, and this is going to get me a list, and I can just iterate over the list that it is giving the bean definition name, and I'm going to print out all the beans right over here just to check whether my my human bean, my food bean, my air bean is available inside it. So let's just see that, and can I run this method right now? Okay, it's just starting my Spring Boot application. Now let's just see over here. Now, as you can see inside, this is where my Spring Boot application starts. Spring has a lot of objects created behind the scene, what we don't care right now, but these are our objects that we are concerned about. it has created our main object called human, and also it has created all the dependent object over here called air, food, and water as well. So I have the human object is also available, and right now I want that human object in order to call this leave method which is present inside the human class. So what I'm going to do right now, inside this container I have all the objects. So this thing proves me that. So right now I can do what? I can ask the container to get me the bean of what? Bean of human class. So I'm going to say human.class, get me the bean of that. I'm going to hit command option B, and I'm going to get the human class object right over here. And now I can uncomment this line in order to execute the leave method which is present inside the human class. So inside the human class, we have a leave method over here, and this is the method that I want to execute. Now remember, whenever I'm going to be executing this method first check whether the air, water, and food, which are the mandatory dependency that has been injected to these variables that we have defined. And obviously these variables will be injected to this because we made sure on top of all our setter method we have @AutoWord, which will make sure to inject the dependency of water, food, and air using this setter method over the human object. And as all these objects are available right over here, you can see water, food, air, all these objects are available. So Spring will make sure whenever it is going to create the human class object, it knows that this has all these dependencies, and this dependency the developer instructed to use the setter method and to inject all this dependency using the setter method. So in that way, Spring will resolve all the dependency whenever it is going to create the human object, and that is the object it is giving me right over here. Whenever I'm asking for the bean right over here, I'm asking for the object to my container that get me that human object, and I'm calling the leave method. And let's just see what is going to happen right now. Let me just run this method, and if I'll come over here, and there you go, alive, I'm leaving my life. So this is the Spring way to do the dependency injection using those annotations. And right now I can safely remove this as list thing over here because I do not want to print all the beans. So these are the couple of lines of code that I have to write instead of those whole big mess that we have created before, isn't it? So there you go, alive, I'm living my life. So everything is working good, and the dependency injection is also took place. But what about if the developer, whenever he is creating this setter methods, he is mistakenly forgetting to add this @AutoWord annotation? Now that is going to create a mess, isn't it? If I'm gonna comment out all these AutoWord annotations over here on top of the setter method, if I'll go to your Spring Boot application, run this particular program again, now the things will not work. If you're gonna see over here, you can see it dead, I cannot leave, because now the dependency is not injected to the human class. And the dependency over here has not been injected, and just because we have missed this @AutoWord annotation. So if you are using the setter injection using Spring, you have to write the @AutoWord annotation on top of the setter method, otherwise the dependency injection is not going to happen, and the object the Spring is going to return you right over here, that is just the human object without injecting the dependency. So that's why in Spring it's always recommended whenever you are creating any dependency for human class, as these dependencies are mandatory dependency, we have to have this dependency injected in order to make the human class function, in order to have the leave method function. So we need to inject the dependency whenever the object will be created. So in that case, the constructor injection is a better choice. Right now, if you're gonna come over here, and if you're gonna create a new constructor, command N, create constructor, use all the dependency to create the new constructor of human, and that's it. You literally don't have to write all the setter method, and you can happily comment this out like this. Okay, now we do not have any setter method, we have the leave method, and we have the constructor that the Spring will use right now to do the dependency injection. And you can write a @AutoWord annotation over here like this. Now if you're gonna go to the main Spring Boot class, and if you're gonna run this method, the things will work as expected right now. Okay, so right here is this saying alive, I'm living my life. And one more good thing is that even if whenever you are doing any constructor injection, you don't specify this @auto word, still the things will work. The @auto word is not compulsory whenever you are doing constructor based dependency injection and when only one constructor is present. Now there is only one constructor is present of human class, so we don't have to put out over here. So whenever Spring will create the object of human, because component is mentioned, Spring automatically going to use this constructor and it is going to see, oh, I have to provide the dependency of these things because these are mentioned as the constructor parameters. So these are the mandatory dependency for human. So Spring will inject the dependency for this, and all these things will be set to the air, water, and food variable that we have defined over here. So by not mentioning @auto word and by making it optional, Spring is not forcing us to tightly couple our class called human with Spring framework. So we do not have to write much Spring related annotations like @auto word and all these things. So, it basically means that the human class, can also be used as a normal Java class even if you are not using Spring framework. So we are not using much of Spring annotations over here to do dependency injection whenever we are choosing the constructor based dependency injection. I hope this makes sense a little bit. Alright, so why the constructor injection is preferred over the setter injection. So far the concepts that we have discussed here, the first thing that we got to learn, the constructor injection is good because the constructor, if you are specifying the parameters right here, then whoever is going to use our human class, he has to mention the dependency. He has to provide the dependency in order to initialize the human class. So we are making our dependency visible to the client. Whenever the client, like the test class, is creating the human class object, let's say he has to create a human class object, this will give him error and he has to provide all the different dependency that is needed. So we are making the dependency visible like this. So the constructor injection is preferred not only in Spring framework, it is preferred as a go-to rule when it compares to the setter-based injection. But when should we use the setter-based injection? Well, the setter-based injection can be used if you have an optional dependency. As I said, these are the mandatory dependency. We made the client provide these things whenever he is initializing the human object because these are mandatory. But let's say there is something optional. Let's say the human to leave, we also need a dependency called home. So I'm going to say home. But let's say let me just create this home class. Okay, now I got a home class, so I have another dependency called home. But let's say this home is not a mandatory dependency for a human. The human can live without a home. The human can live in a road as well. So in that case, I can just create a setter like this and I can provide a setter method to inject the dependency of home. So here home is an optional dependency, but these three are mandatory dependency. That's why I have defined it over here inside the constructor of human, and for this I have created the setter. Okay, so yeah, so I think this is one place where you can choose setter injection if there is not mandatory dependencies are available inside a class. The point number 2, if you are using setter injection, I'm going to show you like what is going to happen, why the constructor injection is preferred. Let's say I do not have this constructor. Okay, so I'm going to comment this out and I'm going to uncomment all my setters. Okay, now this looks clean. So now understand, in the setter injection, whenever you are defining all the setter methods over here, there is an absolute probability, as I said, you can miss out a auto word annotation right over here, which you are defining on top of the setter, and that will create null pointer exception in most of the case. And most of the time, I also faced similar situation during the development when I mistakenly forgot to put the auto word annotation. For an example, let's just say I will go to all of my dependency called the air class, and I will be creating a method called public void breathe, and I'm gonna do a sysout, and I'm gonna say I am breathing. Okay, and similarly I'll go to the water class, and I'm gonna create a method called public void drink, and I'm gonna say sout, I'm drinking water, by the way. I am drinking water, right? Let's say I have this couple of method. Now I'll go to the human class, right? I have the air and water as a dependency where I've created one method inside them. So I'll go to the a leave method right over here, and let's say I'm calling the methods. Let's say I'm gonna say air dot breathe, and I'm gonna say water dot drink, right? I'm calling this couple of methods. Let's say if I'm gonna run this program, obviously the things will work fine, and I think my two logs will be over here. I'm breathing and I'm drinking water. But this is a happy scenario. Remember, whenever I am trying to do the dependency injection, as I have to write this @auto_var annotation manually before my set food, set water, and set air method. Imagine mistakenly if I have not provided the @auto_var annotation, then obviously the Spring will not inject the object of air whenever it is creating the human class object, and obviously this air.breathe right now gonna get me the null pointer exception, because this air is going to be null, as the setter method of the set air will never be called because there is no @auto_var annotation present over here. Now if I'm gonna run the same program, I think I'm gonna get a null pointer exception, and there you go. Because air is null, the air.breathe method cannot work, and that's why I'm getting a null pointer exception. So writing a setter and making it @auto_var in Spring obviously going to cause the infamous null pointer exception. Another important issue you're going to be experiencing if you are going to use the setter injection over the constructor injection, and that is the problem of immutability. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. See, I'm creating the human class object. Obviously, I will not be creating it. Spring will be creating it. Let's just go to the dependency injection demo application. So here we are asking Spring to give the human class object. So Spring is creating the human class object, injecting the dependency using the setter right now, and getting me the human object, and I'm calling the leave method on top of it. But this human object is a mutable object or an immutable object. You know the difference between immutable and mutable, right? If you don't, then check these videos that I have over here. But the immutable means the object which cannot be changed, and mutable means if there is an object, we can change the state of that object. We can modify that object, right? Right now, this object that we are getting over here is a mutable or an immutable object. Obviously, this is a mutable object, and that's a very big problem. I'm going to tell you how. Let's say I'll go to the human class, and I have air, water, and food. And let's say I'm not forgetting to write @auto_var, and all the @auto_var annotations are present on top of the setter. Let's say I'll go to this water class. Okay, in the drink method, let's say I'll define a variable over here. Let's say int let's say amount of water that I'm drinking, and let's say I'm initializing a 10-liter water that let's say I just want per day to drink. Okay, int amount of water, and I'm gonna say I'm drinking, and I'm gonna say I'm drinking plus and amount of water right over here. I'm gonna concatenate with this one. Okay, so there you go. I'm drinking this amount of water. Right now the amount of water is 10 liter. And let's just say I'm creating a getter and setter for this particular variable like this. So the getters and setters are also present inside the water class. Just look at that. Water, amount of water. This is the variable, then the getters and setter, and then I have a drink method. Okay, now I'll tell you how it is going to create a problem, right? So right now, if I'll go to my human class, okay, and if I'm gonna go to the leave method, water.drink is there. Okay, so let's just run this. So this drink method will be executed and will be printing the details. Now it is just saying I'm breathing, I'm drinking 10 liters of water. So that's how the new change that we have done in the drink method is populating over here. And I'm just saying alive, I'm living my life. But let's say the programmer, one cute programmer is there, and what he is doing this. He's just doing public void modify a water object. Okay, and here what he is doing, he's creating a new water object. I'm gonna say like water object is equal to new water, and water object dot set amount of water, and let's say he's just setting right now 1000 liter of water right now. And now what he is doing, he's just doing this dot water is equal to water object. This water object is assigning to this water right now. And now this modify water object method he is calling right over here. For an example, right over here, he got some task from his client and he is solving the thing in this way. Okay, now we're going to see what is going to happen. If I'm going to run this particular method, this is going to create a very big mess. And look at that. I'm drinking 1000 liter of water. And obviously the human cannot drink 1000 liter of water. Now the problem here is that here I'm able to change, or I'm able to modify the water object which has been assigned previously by Spring Framework. You remember? Spring first has given me this object. Spring first has given me this object, and this object has been created by Spring, and all the dependency also has been injected by Spring. But when I am calling this method, inside this method, I'm modifying the water object, and I'm changing the state of that human object. The previous object of water, which has been assigned to the human object, right now has been changed with this object. And this is a very big mess because I'm changing the state of the human object. And that should not be done. And if you're using the setter injection, you cannot actually protect it because you have a setter method over here. The way you can protect it by making all this variable final like this. Okay, final, and final like this. And obviously all these variables are going to be private, like this, private, and private, right? So the variables, let's say the dependencies should be final in nature to make sure that this water variable cannot be changed once it is initialized. And obviously you cannot write setter method if you are making this variables final in order to avoid that previous problem that I have shown you. For that, the setter method cannot be used because obviously Spring has to first create the object and then it has to inject the dependency. And once the object of human has been created, it cannot inject the dependency because it is final. So that's why the setter method will not work if you are trying to make your object immutable. So in that case, you have to comment out all the setter method like this, and then you can just come over here and create a constructor like this. Okay, and obviously as I said, you really don't have to write a auto-where annotation on top of the constructor. This is optional. And doing a constructor based dependency injection, you can actually make all your mandatory dependency final, and that's ensure that whenever the human class object will be created, this object are also be injected in the same time, and once the object has been constructed, it cannot be changed. You cannot basically change the state of the water. Now if you want to go to our modify method, you can see this dot water that we are doing. We're creating a new water object and assigning it to this dot water. Right now this cannot be possible, and that's why we are getting a error over here because water is a final object and it cannot be changed. So this thing even knowingly somebody cannot do inside our code. Okay, let me remove that modify object right over here. So immutability is one more possible scenario which can happen in the setter injection and create mess. And that's why, to avoid that, you should always stick to the constructor based injection like this. All right, one more reason why constructor injection is the way we design our classes. There, the constructor injection can really help us. How? For an example, see guys, I told you already, like, if you want dependencies which are mandatory, then just expose it to the client using a constructor, so that when they are creating the object, they actually can see the dependencies are visible to them, like, these are the dependency the human class need. So they will be providing that. But let's say this is a class that I have created, and one day one of my junior come to my office. I have given him a task. Let's say I told him to create a class called Cyclone, storm and cyclone and those things, earthquake, those things. Imagine I told him to create a class called Cyclone. So what he'll do, for an example, is a fun thing. Imagine he'll create a class called Cyclone right here, like this, Cyclone, and he'll come to the human class and create a dependency right over here, like this. Let's say Cyclone, okay, and Cyclone. You might be already wondering, okay, Avilas, why you are doing it? Why you are writing a Cyclone dependency over here? Obviously, that doesn't make sense, right? The human class does not depend on the Cyclone. Obviously, if the Cyclone comes, the human will die, right? He doesn't need Cyclone. This is a bad design. Most of the time, if you're gonna doing setter injection or even field injection. Okay, I haven't told you what is field injection, right? Field injection means you really don't need a constructor or setter to do the dependency injection. You can actually write the auto word over here only on top of the variable itself. Then this auto word will basically use different types to inject the Cyclone object. And you might find my other videos how this is actually work behind the scene. But this is one of the most easiest approach in order to do the dependency injection. You can just go to the Cyclone class, then just add a component annotation over here. So Spring will create the object of Cyclone, and you can come to the human.java and you just add it as a dependency and write it auto word, and that's it. The dependency will be injected to this. But this is a design smell. The human class does not really depends on the Cyclone. If you want to put here this object or any other object or hundreds and tons of objects inside the human class, that's okay. But that is violating the solid principle, the single responsibility principle. You know the single responsibility principle in solid that says that every class should have a single and a single responsibility. Like the air, water, food, these are the dependency it need, because the human, for the basic human survival need, air, water, food are needed. So that's why these are the perfect dependency for the human class. But this is not connected with all those things, and we cannot provide this as a dependency inside the human class. But you might see in your project people do this kind of thing. Maybe they will have hundreds of dependency and they will just simply use @auto to do the field injection. And if you're gonna do a field injection like this, or if you're gonna even create a setter for the Cyclone like this, command N, create a setter, and if you're gonna go to that setter, and if you're gonna add a auto word annotation, this will also go unnoticed, and people can come and start creating hundreds of variables inside the human class, and they will just do auto word like this. And now this basically makes sure that this is a dependency of the human class, where it's actually not, and it's a bad design. And to avoid this kind of thing, you can go with the constructor injection, because you know what will happen if you're gonna, let me just remove this set Cyclone over here. Okay, if you're gonna start creating a lot of dependency over here, and if you're gonna start defining inside the constructor, it is noticeable to the client. And even in your IDEs during the code review, this can be easily caught. If you are changing the human class constructor, the client will also notice, okay, I don't have to pass a Cyclone object in order to create a human object. Or, if somebody is going really crazy and creating hundreds of dependencies over here, even the IDE will start complaining and giving you warning if you're going to put more than 7 or 8 parameters inside the constructor. So the IDE itself will stop you that this is not the best design practice that you are following. So, making the dependency visible inside a constructor is a good practice, because it basically helps us to find design smell if there is any in the code review itself or during the development stage itself. The dependencies will never go unnoticed if you're following constructor injection. Okay, so the last reason of the day, and this is a very important reason. Okay, let's say there is a human class, and I'm gonna comment out the constructor, and let's say I'm gonna uncommenting all my setters over here like this. And obviously all this setter will right now complain, because as I told you, I have made it final, the variables, the dependencies, let me make it not final. And also let me just remove the constructor that I have over here. Okay, let's say that I'm doing the setter based dependency injection right over here. Okay, cool. Now this can really impact the unit testing whenever you are doing it. Let's say you are trying to do the unit testing right now. I'll go to the test package, and if you'll go over here, you'll be finding the dependency injection test is over here. Let's say I'm writing a test method in order to test the human class leave method I want to test. Let's say this method I want to test. In order to test this method, what I have to do, let me go to the test class. In order to test that method, I need to have a human class object, maybe something like this. This is my object, okay? And I will initialize that object. Maybe I can initialize the object right over here, something like this. Or maybe what I can do, I can just write a public void before each method, okay, something like this, to initialize this human object, something like this. I will take this guy from here, Control C, paste it over here, and I will not initialize it over here, and rather I'm going to write a before each, something like this. And the before each method is basically going to run before any test method. For an example, I'm writing a test method. Let's say I'm going to test the method called leave. So I'm going to say a test leave, and I can do whatever right over here. Let's say I'm going to call that method. I'm going to copy the human class reference, and I'm going to write leave over here. That means I'm calling the leave method right here. But to call the leave method, I need the object of human. This is null over here. So before the test method will execute, this before each method will be executed. So first, this method will execute. This will initialize the human object right here. And then the test will execute, and it will call the leave method right over here. So I'm going to run the test. Let's just see what is going to happen. Okay. You're going to be seeing some exception, and this is a null pointer exception right over here. And you can see the exception is coming because of the breathe method of the air class, because the air is null. So that means I told you that I am calling I'm creating the human object right over here. That's good. But inside the leave, in order to call this leave method, I'm doing air.breathe, water.drink. So this air and water objects need to be injected. So how this air and water object will be injected? There is no constructor over here. So to inject them, I have to use all this setter method, isn't it? I have to use all this setter method to inject that. Okay. So right now, how can I do that? So to do that, I have to inject the dependency of human over here. And what are the dependency of human? The dependency of humans are AR. So I'm going to saying AR. The dependency of human is food. So I'm going to say food. And also the dependency of human is water. So water. So these are the object reference, but these are not the real objects. But what I have to do, I have to create the object for this. In JUnit, we don't have to create the object by ourselves. Rather, we use a framework called Mockito. This is just like Spring. You just use an annotation called mock, and mock, it will give a mock object. It will give an air object to this mock object, fake object, something like that you can think. It's just going to give an air object. It is just create an air object and will inject it to this variable. Like this, right now I want Mockito to create a mock object for food and inject it right over here. Like that, I'm going to write another mock annotation so the water object will be created and will be injected right over here. Now the air object, food object and the water object, all three objects are available, and that we have to inject it to the human object. Now here we have the human object. We have to inject the dependency, but this is not going to be that straightforward. You can use the setter over here directly, but I'll tell you the best practices later. So this in real time, this is how we do it. To inject the dependency of water, food and air to the human, we're going to be taking a help of a class called a reflection utils test utils, this class. And then you're going to be use a method called set field. So this method will be using where we'll be defining the target object, the field name inside it, and then the exact object value like this. So this is my set field method. So obviously I want to inject the dependency of this object. Now inside this object called human, if I'll go to the object of human, there is a variable called AR. Let me copy the variable name. Let me go back and right over here inside the human object, there is a variable called AR. And to that AR variable, I will be giving the actual object which need to be injected. In this case, this is the object that the Mockito framework is giving me. Copy this object and give it over here. Okay, like that, you copy the set field and paste it for a couple more times like this for all the fields that we have. So let me just add one more field that we have inside the human, which is this one. Inside the human, we also have another variable called water. Let me go back by hitting the command and bracket option. And right over here, paste it, the water thing, and give it the actual object. The actual object is right here. Copy that and come over here and paste it like this. And like that, we have one more field inside the human reference, and here another field that we have called food, and obviously there's a private field. In order to set the private field value, we have to mention the field name, then the actual object that we have defined over here called food. Copy the food right from here, go over here and paste the reference. So these are the object references. These are the variable name that we have defined inside this reference. In this reference contains the human object. So inside the human object, just copy all the field name and just provide the objects that you have created over here. And as our variables are private, we have used reflection to set the object value to all these variables defined inside the human class. Okay, now let's just go ahead and we can run this test right now. And let's just see right now if our leave method is working and all the dependency has been injected to the human object. Looks like my test method is failed, and what it is saying, illegal argument exception, could not find field AR inside this object human. Why is that? Oh, I have defined the human. This is my target object, and this should not be inside the string. This is the object that I have created, and inside this object I will be finding these three fields. So I do not have to keep them inside the double quote. Let me save this and let me run this again, and let's just see whether it is working or not. So if I'll come over here, so the things are working, the test is successful, and you can see alive, I'm living my life. So things are working fine, and I'm able to call this leave method. But the problem is I have to use this reflection technique here in order to inject the value for this three variable which is present inside this, and these are actually the real objects that I have created using the Mockito framework. Now this is not actually a problem. We can simply avoid these 3 lines of code, or if we have many fields over here, we don't have to use reflection over here in order to inject all this dependency if we have a constructor based injection, dependency injection defined. So if we'll go to this human class, okay, and if you're gonna uncomment the constructor like this, and if you're gonna comment out all the setters that we have, let's comment out this. Let's say we have the constructor for these things are available, then we really don't have to do all these things. You just create the object, create the mock objects like this in your test class, then use the human class constructor and pass in the object for air, water, and food, right? And that's it. It's as simple as that. Right now this method will run before this method, and I'll be getting my human class ready with all the dependency, and I can simply call the lib method. So a constructor injection is always preferred even when you are doing any unit testing. Okay, so this is where you can see my unit test case is and is working good. So in the test cases also, it is really preferred if you have any classes define a constructor injection for that class rather than a field injection or rather than the setter injection. So these are the setter injection, and also make sure that you can also simply comment out the constructor, and it's very easy. You can just write add auto word over here and things will work fine for you. But again, that will cause a different problem. This is what we call field injection, right? You can also use field injection. There are 3 types of dependency injection in Spring. One is called field injection, which is this one, and one is called constructor injection, which is this one, and one is called setter injection, which is this one. Okay, so choose the one based on the scenario, but most of the time constructor injection is good because all the different regions that we have defined. Only when the field injection can take over, maybe if there is an optional dependency. Maybe for an example, I have created a class called Cyclone. Let's say one quick example I'll give you and I'll wrap up. Let's say I have this human class constructor which have all the mandatory dependency specified over here. And if I'll go to my main Spring Boot class, this is the main Spring Boot class where I'm getting the human class object and calling the lib method. Let me run this method and see if the things are working fine. Okay. Let's say the things are working fine and I'm getting my lib method executed over here. But let's say in my human class, if I have an optional dependency, as I said, you can go for the setter injection, and also you can utilize the field-based injection. For example, you can define any class. Let's say I have a class called Cyclone, and you can write a Cyclone dependency over here like this. In order to inject the dependency, you just write add auto word. So this will also work good, and you don't have to worry about whether the dependency will be injected or not. If you're simply writing add auto word for this, you really don't have to pass in this particular thing inside the constructor, or you don't have to even create any setter method for this Cyclone. It will be directly injected by Spring. So this is what we call a field-based injection. We're writing the auto word on top of the variable, but this is also not recommended. Only when there is an optional dependency you have to satisfy. For an example, right now the Cyclone object will be injected to this, obviously. Maybe if I'm gonna come to the lib method, and if I'm gonna print out the Cyclone dependency, I'm gonna say Cyclone object, and if I'm gonna pass here this dot Cyclone object, then obviously the object will be injected by Spring. If I'm going to run my application, then you're going to be seeing the Cyclone object will be there for sure. Okay, the Cyclone object is injected. This object Spring only have created, and Spring only have injected to the human class. But let's say this dependency is not present, right? if this dependency is not present. For an example, if I'll go to the Cyclone class and if I'm gonna uncomment this @component, then obviously you're going to have a problem whenever you'll be running this particular program, because the human class right now have this 3 dependency which is injected by the constructor, and this is also a dependency where we have written @AutoWord. Obviously when the human class object will be created, this dependency will also be injected by Spring, as we have mentioned here @AutoWord. So if I'm going to run this, as this Cyclone object we have commented out the @component, this will not available inside the container and this will fail. And you can see application failed to start, and you can see the human being required this dependency called Cyclone that could not be found, and it is asking me to define this one and consider defining a bean of Cyclone. It is asking me to do what I do not have because I have commented out the @component. And if I make this dependency as a optional dependency, here I can just write required equal to false. And in that case, I'm saying we have this dependency, but the required is false. Even though it is not present, still initialize the human class and don't create a problem over here. Now, if you're going to see over here, see my application back on working. Now the Cyclone object is null because it's not present. Let's say if the Cyclone object is there, if I uncomment the component, so the object will be created and will go to the container. In this case, you'll be seeing the object over here. So right now that Cyclone, you can see the object is over here. So the dependency that I have defined over here is right now the required is false. In this case, maybe the field injection is an option to you. You can use the field injection. Otherwise, if it is a mandatory thing, you can define easily. You don't write AutoWord over here. Just define one more Cyclone object over here and initialize it over here like this. This dot Cyclone is equal to Cyclone, something like this, right? But again, in this case, you are making this dependency mandatory. And if you are making this mandatory, if you are not writing @component over here on top of this, in case this is not available, then the constructor injection will fail right over here. Okay, and that will be the problem. So if I'm going to run this, okay, you're going to be seeing I'm having the same issue. It is saying that the Cyclone could not be found, and it is asking me to defining a bean of Cyclone in my configuration. So for the mandatory dependency, you can put it inside the constructor, but as the Cyclone is not a mandatory dependency, I can simply remove it over here. And either in case I have to provide this dependency, I will go with this approach of field injection over the constructor injection, because it is just giving me this required parameter which can be set to false like this. All right, this is one more reason.